Oh, fantastic. Thank you, Michaela. We're going to be having an interactive exercise and opportunity for group discussion towards the end of the webinar. We're going to be using Mentimeter, which is an online polling platform, which is where the presentation on your screen is coming from. And we just want to pause really quickly and just issue a reminder that implementing hybrid methods is going to be new to a lot of us. So we'd like to look at this as a learning event, and we just want to create a space where we're all learning together. So again, welcome, thank you, and we can get started. So if you will bear with me as I move some stuff around on my screen, thank you. Okay, so to say a few quick words about Public Agenda. We are a national, nonpartisan, nonprofit research and public engagement organization. We strive to strengthen democracy and expand opportunity in the US. One of the ways that we do this work is that we do deep listening and problem solving around challenges that are identified. And we help communities and partners work to meet their engagement goals. So before we get into the meat of the presentation, we're going to do some quick intros. Michaela, can you please introduce yourself?
Sure. Sorry. Hello, everyone. I'm Michaela Townsend. I'm a public engagement associate here at Public Agenda, and along with Jennifer, I will be helping discuss hybrid meetings. So it's great to be here with you all this afternoon.
Thanks, Michaela. And I am Jennifer Orellana, and I am the project coordinator for the public engagement team. And as Michaela mentioned, we're going to be guiding you all through this webinar. And we are really excited to be here with all of you today. So just to say a few quick words about the goal of this webinar. So we're just going to quickly define what a hybrid meeting is. We're going to be sharing some examples and strategies. We'll also be sharing some things to consider, and also we'll be sharing some tools and resources. So hybrid refers to the physical location of your meeting or event participants. Hybrid meetings and events, in hybrid meetings and events, you'll have a group of participants that are in person, and then you'll have others who are joining online or by phone. So I think many who are foraying into hybrid meetings and events know that it can be challenging to manage. There's different needs for different settings, and along with that, the need to manage different accommodations and resources. So why do hybrid meetings? So many of us we still have in mind to be cautious as things start to open up. Some organizations and institutions are headquartered in one location and have staff in other areas, other regions, states, and countries. And so this kind of structure has been going on prior to the pandemic. And then also another reason to have a hybrid event or meeting would be to create more access for more diverse voices to join your meetings and events, because we certainly, many of us know that for some communities or individuals, physical location can actually be a barrier. So providing options for participation virtually or by phone is very beneficial for portions of the population. So we actually wanted to take a quick pause and just check in with those of you on the call with us, and just ask what your hybrid meeting and event goals or needs are. And so we're going to be doing this using Mentimeter. So we invite you to go to mentee.com. You can go with a desktop device or a handheld device, and you can go to that address, mentee.com, and you can enter the code 1752. 0861. And if one of my colleagues can drop that in the chat, that would be great. So if we can just take a moment and just people can share what it is, what are their goals and their needs around adopting hybrid meetings and structures, that would be great. Thank you, Michaela, for sharing that. Has anybody entered anything into the Mentee? Is it working? Oh, okay, great. I'm seeing some stuff come through. Networking events, learning sessions and workshops, getting content to participants while ensuring everyone stays engaged, how to make it inclusive and equitable, increased access, balancing attention between in-person and digital attendees. Fantastic. Inclusivity, yes. Okay, so answers are coming in. I don't know if this was set up to scroll, so I do apologize if anyone has added something and they don't see it on the screen. These are all really great responses and certainly have come up during our conversations and research on how other people are handling, managing, adopting different hybrid methods and structures. Is there any, does anyone have a goal or a need that they're not seeing represented in the answers yet? And again, I apologize because the Mentee has a feature that scrolls answers and I'm not seeing that right now. So I do apologize. I'm gonna check the chat really quickly to see if anyone added. Ensure that there are promising practices that are easy to follow and utilize. Fantastic. Is that Sadie? I hope I'm pronouncing your name properly. Okay, let me try pressing the S.
Yes,
Thank
you
for
did.
that.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. So glad to hear that. So
the Mentee worked for me, but I also just added it to chat.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Sadie. So actually, thank you so much for participating in this Mentee poll. Again, there's a lot of alignment with what we're seeing on a personal level and also in the research we're doing. And so what we'd like to do is later on in the webinar, we want to actually come back to this a little as we have a group discussion on, you know, what our goals are and what are some of the implications around things like equity and other factors as we are moving into these hybrid structures. Okay, so now we're going to move into sharing. Oh, I'm trying to advance. Okay, so now we're going to share some examples of ways that people are implementing hybrid methods and strategies that might be helpful as we're all thinking about putting together our own hybrid functions. And so we have some examples around information sharing, collaboration and community events, and joint decision making. Okay, so the first up is information sharing. You know, information sharing is a really important foundational aspect of collaborating or working together. And we all want to be sure that the people that we're collaborating with have access to the information they need. And so the first example we wanted to share is of Middletown, Connecticut. It's actually a city in Connecticut. And like many other organizations and institutions, they moved to a virtual public meeting structure after the pandemic restrictions were in place back in March 2020. So legislators for this city decided to keep the virtual meetings even as restrictions have started to ease. One of the tools that they are using to do this is a Cisco product. During the pandemic, Cisco, which is a tech and telecommunications company, began offering 90-day full enterprise trials, and they provided this to Middletown with immediate access at no initial cost. The products are WebEx and WebEx Assistant. And this is a platform that allows for accessibility and public participation. The WebEx Assistant is the artificial intelligence part of the system. It offers real-time closed captions, meeting transcripts, and it can make special notes that are prompted by human speech. And an example of that is if during a meeting, if a motion is made or someone says that they want to highlight something for later, this tool can generate separate records to reflect what was said during the meeting. And this is a feature that allows for more accuracy in transcripts. And transcripts can be a very helpful tool in these hybrid structures, as they can be capturing things that are being discussed, and this is something that you can share afterwards that people can reference or refer back to. Another cool feature of the WebEx and WebEx Assistant is that participants can call in with a flip phone or a landline, and they can virtually raise their hand when they want to make a comment or they want to participate. Legislation was put into place to support making public meetings accessible through technology, and that's House Bill 6448 in Connecticut that permits hybrid or fully virtual meetings after the pandemic. And then they also have Senate Bill 183, and similarly, it permits hybrid and virtual meetings to be conducted after the pandemic. It also requires having a methodology for public participation. So those are some legislative pieces that are supporting this move. And we encourage you to research your own local legislation wherever you are to see if there are any bills that have been passed to support moving into more hybrid structures. In the case of Middletown, this hybrid format addressed deterrents that had previously impeded participation, and they actually have seen an increase in participation in their public meetings. Also, good to note that this move to with this technology and these hybrid/virtual interactions are actually being funded through the city's operating budget. And so we have some thoughts on ways that we can apply the example of Middletown to the work that we're doing. So one of them would be to use virtual tools and resources, because this can open access for people to participate in meetings and events. The flexibility to join online or by phone can actually help increase participation, particularly in community members that don't typically join due to barriers, things such as the need for childcare, issues and challenges around transportation, timing of meetings for a whole subsets of the community, including working people with different types of work schedules, students that might want to be involved, and then certainly when there are weather issues, being able to join virtually is quite convenient. So the next examples we wanted to share are around collaboration and community events. And the first example we have of that is this church, Emmanuel Presbyterian Church, like so many other churches across the country, moved into offering virtual services so that they could continue offering this to their communities. My apologies, one moment. But this is the Emmanuel Presbyterian Church is a New York City based church that holds services that can be joined in person and by Zoom. Sunday service is held in a main Zoom room, and then they offer Sunday school lessons for children from toddler age through 6th grade, and they do that through 2 breakout rooms within that main Zoom room. They also offer a Zoom fellowship, and that's available directly after the service, which allows the online attendees to join a breakout room where they can engage in conversation, or they can stay in the main Zoom room and observe the communion, should they choose. For in-person attendees, they must register ahead, even infants, and they must adhere to COVID safety protocols, and that includes social distancing and masks. At the moment, there's only 50 people who can attend in person. The registration allows the church to plan ahead in terms of seating and distancing and contact tracing should the need arise. Registered groups must arrive and check in together, and they are escorted to their seat by an usher. And then again, the registration helps with the planning for the seating, which is done according to the size of the registered party. Adults must show an ID when they check in, and they must complete a visitor form and reaffirm health screening questions. This church's website provides information and links for those who are attending in person, which include the registration link, a link to the recent COVID safety guidelines, and they also provide an email contact for any individual who has not yet received their registration confirmation. And then for online participants, they're able to access a downloadable PDF of the church service or the Zoom instructions should they need them to participate. And so some thoughts around application from this example are you might want to consider registration for any of your in-person portions of any meetings and events. Certainly plan for social distancing and other COVID protocols. You might want to consider creating a Zoom breakout room for your virtual attendees so that they can also socialize while you're having breaks in your in-person meeting and your in-person attendees are socializing with each other. If you have a website and you have the capability to add links, you might want to provide instructions for in-person and virtual attendance. You might want to also assign and include contact information for someone who can help both those who are going to attend in person and those who are going to be attending online. Certainly should a registration issue arise, or if someone's having any trouble connecting or accessing the online portion of your event. So another example that we wanted to share is of the city of Austin, Texas. This example is actually more like a process or a mini public, which is a protected space for deliberation amongst a diverse and representative group of community members. It's more so a process than a one-off. A little backstory on Austin is that prior to 2015, Austin residents could watch city council meetings either online or through a public access channel on their televisions, but they were not part of the discussion. And then simultaneously around this time, the city of Austin was experiencing a rapid and diverse population growth. And so city leadership recognized that there was a need to hold a month-long multi-channel consultation with the community leading up to a special virtual town hall meeting. One of the goals of this, well, the major goal of the town hall meeting was there was going to be a public engagement strategy to improve city process with the goal of more effective and more inclusive public participation. And so they wanted to get input from the community on this strategy before the council then went to take the strategy to a vote. And so this virtual town hall was set up to allow for in-person and digital attendance and participation. It was streamed online and it was accessible through the public access channel through local television. Participants were able to provide input through verbal comment and paper survey for those who were in person. And then there was a teleconference line for individuals to call in and provide comment. They could also text in their input and feedback. There was a Speak Up Austin forum where people could leave asynchronous comments. And then there was also a conversation on Twitter where people were using a hashtag to tweet out their input and their comments. Another interesting part of this example is that these channels of participation that I just shared were actually open throughout the month that this virtual town hall was held. So the channels were open at the beginning of the month. The channels were used during the virtual town hall meeting, and then they were open after the virtual town hall so that participants and community members could continue to provide comment and feedback. And another interesting piece of this example is that public participation has continued to be used through online and in-person, basically a hybrid format in Austin. They've continued to use this format. And some application, some ways that we think that these could be applied are, we might think when we're going to be holding hybrid events, we might want to provide key information and materials ahead of time. So you want to make sure all your participants, those who are in person, those who are online, those who are on the phone, you want to make sure that they're receiving exactly the same materials, whether those are surveys, agendas, reports, dialogue prompts, everything. You want to also think about using a variety of channels for participation. So that would be your hybrid component of having people in person, having people join through Zoom or other video conferencing platforms, providing a conference line for people who have access issues. And then you might want to consider having the channels of participation open prior, during, and after your meeting or event as well. Another thing that you might want to consider implementing is, or actually, I'm sorry, to take a step back, to say a little bit more about channels of participation that you might want to use prior, during, or after. You can use things like Mentimeter, which is the online polling software we're using right now. There's others, Poll Everywhere and Slido, also do similar function as Mentimeter. You could do Twitter, again, using a hashtag around a conversation or a topic that you want to discuss. I think many of us know that Facebook allows you to have asynchronous conversations. You could use that as well. And if you have a website and a space for a forum on it, you could use that, or Slack as well. That's another way to have either instant messaging or asynchronous conversations. Public Agenda also uses an engagement tool called Text Talk Engage. It's a way to share or collect information through a SMS texting platform. And so those are just some examples of some channels that you might want to consider using. And then when you're in your meetings, if possible, you might want to think about sharing results in real time for any polls or surveys or feedback. And that can include on screen in person if you have that capability, or perhaps a projector that can project onto a wall or a sheet. You can certainly share your results out on a Zoom screen, as we are doing right now. And then if you have participants who are calling in, you might want to think about pausing at different portions of your meeting so that you can read out loud where you are in either your presentation, what page for a report or presentation, or what slide you're on. So those are just some things to consider that might be useful or beneficial when you're having hybrid events. And then the last example I'm going to be sharing is around joint decision making, which is another key aspect of collaborating, or another key reason why we're bringing people together. This example is the Invicta Toastmasters Club in Portugal. It's a local chapter of an international public speaking and leadership organization. They transitioned to hybrid after pandemic restrictions eased in their town of Porto, Portugal. The club created a task force to oversee this move to the hybrid format. And over several sessions, the task force and the club members, they were giving input and feedback on the meetings. And this was allowing for them to make adjustments from meeting to meeting or session to session. In that process, they were able to see improvement in the quality of their meetings and sessions to the point where they were able to reach a sustainable model that their participants are currently enjoying. This iterative process was good for process improvement, logistically and organizationally, but it's also from an engagement perspective, it was also a really great process as it gave the participants a voice and an opportunity to have their needs met, which is important when you're working and collaborating with others. And again, just to bring up the polling software that a lot of people have been using in virtual formats, this organization, Toastmasters, they hold speech competitions, and so as they're working virtually and now in hybrid formats, they are, in order to be convenient and inclusive, they'll use polling software during competitions. They also will use Zoom chat function for sending feedback and evaluations for those members who perform speeches during the club. And so that's another way to work together. Some takeaways from the Invicta Club and Toastmasters overall are that for hybrid events, it's important as much as possible to create an equitable experience for your participants that are online, as well as the individuals that are joining in person. They stress adhering to rules and guidelines in terms of locality and venue. And you'll hear us mention several times throughout this conversation that it's very important to check your local rules and guidelines as these around the COVID and COVID restrictions, as these are going to be different from state to state and country to country. Another interesting thing about this example is they are using a weekly participation survey that they're sending out through Google Forms. This keeps their members updated on the current rules and guidelines for their town. It also shares the number of in-person participants that are going to be joining the upcoming meeting. They'll mention any location and schedule changes. And they also have a reminder to their in-person attendees to communicate when they have a conflict and they are not able to attend in person, because this then opens up space for others who might be on an in-person attendee wait list. So some things to consider about this example that could be applied to the work we're trying to do right now is some organizations like Toastmasters and others, but certainly Toastmasters, which is an international organization, they've been using hybrid models for some time prior to the pandemic, actually. But it's important to acknowledge that for most of us, it's new and it's going to be iterative and it's going to be a work in progress. So that's something to keep in mind as we move forward in this new hybrid space. Things to consider would be creating an ongoing feedback loop and working collaboratively with your teams or your participants to determine what is and isn't working for your hybrid structure. You might want to consider using polling platforms or Google Forms or other collaborative tools for voting and decision making. And you might also want to consider using collaborative tools like Google Docs, Office 365, which is Microsoft's cloud-based service, or a program called Padlet when you're doing iterative collaborative work and decision-making processes. And just really quickly, for anyone who's not familiar with Padlet, it's a cloud-based real-time collaborative web platform that allows users to upload, organize, and share content to virtual bulletin boards, which are called Padlets. So those are a few examples that we wanted to highlight for you of the ways that people are implementing and adopting hybrid methods and processes. So now I'm going to turn things over to Michaela, who's going to share with us some resources.
Sure, thank you, Jennifer. So as we see with Jennifer's highlighted examples, hybrid meetings like in-person gatherings need to be planned with intention to fully engage your audience. So in this part of the discussion, I'd like to discuss like the resources and the structures and the formatting surrounding hybrid meetings, as well as technical considerations for your organizations, as well as considerations that we, not only as organizers, but as participants, need to keep in mind while we're holding hybrid events. Next slide. So when thinking of formatting and structuring your meeting, always remember that part of your audience aren't going to be able to receive that same in-person experience, and kind of losing that in-person aspect has a chance of disconnecting some people if there aren't parameters in place to engage everyone. So planning for hybrid meetings doesn't mean splitting and accommodating two separate audiences, but expertly engaging everyone despite the physical distance. So, you know, before a meeting gets put in place, assigning tech assistants, which are team members that can navigate online parts of your meeting, is extremely essential, which means that they understand, they understand the hardware and software needed, the physical equipment, cameras, laptops, microphones, and also having an understanding of the meeting platform you're using, whether it be Zoom, BlueJeans, AT&T. They're able to moderate online conversation, and they can effectively engage your audience, and then also taking that communication with your online audience and bringing it to your team or to the in-person audience that you have. And speaking of a conversation, agenda setting is also important, which is creating clear, detailed agenda that aids the flow of conversation and allows your team to set expectations of the outcome of your discussions. So if the goal of your meeting is to make a decision, then your team can create an agenda that slowly guides the conversation into creating a decision at the end. And then the agenda also lets you carve out time for group activities, breakout sessions, anything outside of discussions. And think of maybe ahead of meetings, sending your participants the agenda as well as your video and dial-in information. Additionally, your team can send any materials that participants would need or would benefit from, any presentations, links, videos that you think would be substantial. If you don't want to email, a good alternative is using like a Google Drive link or similar file sharing software that can keep all your relevant documents in a centralized location. Speaking of documents, using visuals to support online conversation, this is helpful to kind of help explain information that gets lost in translation. So graphics, photos, word clouds, comments, comics. But keep in mind that visuals should be enhancers for your discussion. So informative, uncluttered, and relevant to the topic at hand. If you're, say, using a presentation in person, try screen sharing online and following the in-person online conversation at the same time. Or like, again, using a file sharing or email that presentation to people. And then also pacing the discussion is important. When meetings last too long, participants, particularly your audience, your online audience, can get fatigued and lose focus. So if possible, prioritize timekeeping and following the agenda to ensure that your conversation is robust and succinct and can also hold the attention of your participants. Next slide, please, Jennifer. So then talking a little bit about technology, establishing digital guidelines is really important. It's the first step to making your audience feel comfortable participating online. Inform your audience of what platform you're using. If possible, look at what platform resources there is. Zoom, BlueJeans, they all have tutorials on how to use their platforms. Send it to participants ahead of time that aren't familiar with the software. And then additionally, create guidelines as to what online participation will look like. This includes how online participants will be included in your conversation. If people are participating, are they using the chat function? Are they able to unmute themselves and speak when there's a discussion? Having those in place not only helps facilitate your online activities, but helps prioritize your online and in-person conversations. Your tech setup using audiovisual equipment is a great way for online participants to have access to the in-person space. Cameras, microphones, focus on speakers, or even your in-person audience can create an immersive experience and an inclusive experience. Captions, transcriptions are not only helpful, but provide accessibility for participants who may not be able to hear the conversation, that aren't able to have sound in the space that they have. Jennifer mentioned it earlier in the presentation, there are some conferencing sites that have live transcription features. So look into that if you don't have one in place already. And audio is definitely essential. If people can't hear the conversation, they're less likely to participate. They're less likely to return for future meetings. There are multiple ways of ensuring quality, clear audio. Consider getting external microphones placed strategically near your speakers, near your audience. And also, if online participants are speaking, having speakers connected to your laptop, to your desktop, so the in-person audience can hear your online speakers, that's important as well. And always keep in mind that a percentage of your online participants may not have, or your not in-person audience may not have access to internet or computer, laptops, and devices. So look into video conferencing systems that support call-in alternatives for participants, particularly for mobile, landline phones. In my experience, using a phone gives you better audio than depending on Wi-Fi. So even, taking out the access to internet, calling in usually gives you a better experience either way. So that's definitely important. Next slide, please, Jennifer. And then some in-person considerations is protecting yourself and others. Offer masks to people, and hand sanitizer to mitigate the spread of germs, cleaning and disinfecting hard surfaces that are high traffic, tables, light switches, sinks. Spreading out, keeping distance, try to keep parties together, but separate parties apart. When setting up your space for meetings, try spacing out tables and chairs, keep distance between parties, and then also keeping in mind that the CDC, as well as your local municipality, has guidelines for holding in-person activities. So monitoring the national and local guidelines to see what's permissible in your area for events and gatherings. Next slide. So before your meeting starts, who's on camera? Discuss ahead of time whether or not participants will turn on their videos for upcoming meetings. The benefits of leaving your cameras on and off vary, but having expectations of whether people have to be on camera is necessary, as it can take the stress off of people. So having that discussion. Always remember that you have to prioritize online participants, reinforce the fact that online participants are part of the discussion and they are just as important to the discussion as the people in the building. Especially during your input and comment section of your agenda. And then always encourage participation, utilize polls, voting, questions for all participants to share their thoughts with the community. You can use what we're using, Mentimeter, the platform we've been using, or you can use more tried and true platforms like Google Docs, where people can anonymously share their opinions with each other. Next slide. Then I also want to touch on some challenges, not to deter us from holding hybrid meetings, but to acknowledge that adjusting to a hybrid setting can be daunting. It can be frustrating, but we are all learning. And kind of talking through the challenges can help us be more mindful of how online users are adjusting, but how we as organizers are trying to learn. So just interruptions. Without the nonverbal cues of in-person sessions, people can interrupt or talk over each other. In-person activities, exercises that include small breakout groups, whiteboard sessions, etc. They don't necessarily translate to an online context. As always, technical malfunctions, dropped calls, weak Wi-Fi connections, unmuted mics, they can detract from the purpose of the meeting. And then also everyone has their own workspace with their own sets of challenges and advantages. Noise, background, meeting fatigue, time zones can lead participants to be distracted during meetings. I think, however, if we're all mindful, we're all human, we're all trying, keeping that in mind, and when hosting your events, to have participants and team members keep that in mind as we move forward can be very, very helpful in persevering through adjusting and transforming into hybrid settings. Thank you.
Thank you, Michaela. Lots of great information shared. And I think one of the key takeaways for me, I think it's important to stress the grace, right? As we move into these structures, to have grace with anything new will take some time getting used to. And just the nature of technology is just, again, it's an iterative process. And I think we're going to be constantly refining this type of hybrid strategies and structures. So thanks again, Michaela, for sharing those resources. So we wanted to create some space in this webinar to have some interactivity around this discussion of hybrid, how to work in a hybrid capacity or implementing hybrid structures and strategies. And so we're going to have a quick interactive exercise. We're going to use Mentee. People can also unmute and speak verbally if they'd like to. And then we're going to move into more of a group discussion where we have some framing questions, but certainly we can have some flexibility in space as well to just have a conversation around moving into this new space. So I'm just going to advance here. So we have 3 scenarios that we feel could potentially be coming up as we're doing this work. We're going to be using Mentee again, and I'm going to advance to that slide. We have 1 slide per scenario shortly. And so I'm going to ask Michaela, unless she's already done so. Let's see. So Michaela, can you put a link? There you go. Michaela's putting a link into a slide that contains the language for each of these scenarios in case you need to refer back to it as we do this Mentee exercise. But I am going to read out the first one, and then I will open up the Mentee slide for us to put our responses. So this first scenario is your team is hosting its first hybrid town hall meeting. Your town has permitted in-person meetings. My apologies. Vaccinated people are allowed to be maskless. As community members are entering the space, there are a few who approach your team and have expressed concern about others not wearing a mask in the building. How do we accommodate members who are not comfortable with the current mask policy? So I'm going to advance to the Mentee slide. And again, if you left, you can go back to mentee.com, or we encourage you, if you'd like to participate, to go to mentee.com and put the code, enter the code 175208861. And just we invite you to add any ideas or thoughts, or is this a scenario that you're already encountering now for any of you that are actually moving forward into adopting some of these hybrid features? Okay, we have something coming in. Encouraged to participate online. So to clarify, for any individual who expresses that they are uncomfortable with the mask policy, this would be an encouragement for them to participate online. Okay. Let's see what else is coming in. I think you have to be upfront about that from the beginning so people can make choices for their own safety. Okay. That is a microcosm of everything. Social distancing in the room. Okay. Encourage to attend remotely. Okay. Separate space with online access that has a mask policy. So is anybody experiencing this right now? Anyone have an experience that they'd like to share? Maybe unmute yourself and share with the group what this how this unfolded for you. Okay. Well, these are really great ideas that you're sharing through the Mentee. And again, I apologize that it's not scrolling. There's a feature that lets them scroll up. So, but after this webinar, we will be sending some, with the recording, we'll be sending some resources to you all, including a checklist that you that might be helpful as you're planning your hybrid events and meetings, and some other resources. And we'll also download and share these Mentee results so that you can see what was shared. And again, I apologize. I don't know if I can change that in real time. Can anyone else see on my public agenda? Can you see the responses? It's cut off for me at the bottom of the screen. Okay. All right. So thanks for your responses to this scenario. And I think we'll move forward to the next one. Okay. So the second scenario is your team receives several emails from community members following the last town hall meeting. The members attended the town hall online and expressed that the connection was poor and that they were not able to participate in the evening's discussion. Your team is certain that the internet connection from the evening was secure. How do you ensure remote participation? I'm sorry, how do you ensure remote participants who do not have a stable internet connection can participate? Provide phone in option. Very good. So I actually make sure phone call options share. Yeah. Pre and post survey input tools. Okay. So I actually came upon an interesting example of, engaging communities that have barriers to access, like internet. And I've read about it, two researchers who wanted to work with a subset of a rural community in Kentucky. There was lots of challenges just setting up this working relationship. But once they were able to recruit participants, what they did in this particular area was they identified a local space in the community, and brought together those who were going to participate. And then there was a teleconferencing equipment there. And so a group of people who otherwise would not have been able to engage with these researchers were able to, because they utilized a community resource. I think it could be something like a local fire station or a library or a community center that has access to either like telephone conferencing equipment, or maybe a laptop that people can at the very least connect to the call-in portion of a meeting. And so I thought that was really an interesting example on how people are finding ways to work with communities that have some barriers to access. Let's see, their challenges are on their end, which isn't satisfying, but turning off camera and microphone help. So that thank you for sharing that. Certainly sometimes you might find some success if you are, again, trying to join online and your connection is slow. One good workaround is, as this individual mentioned, to shut your camera off and just participate with the call-in part of the conversation. Oh, this is another great option that was shared: recording meetings. So that's a fantastic workaround as well. If someone is not able to access or drops off and you've recorded, you can share it and the person can catch up in that manner. And a video conferencing platform like Zoom, such as the one we're on, has a transcription that comes with the recording. So that's another great feature that can help people when they're trying to participate in your meetings. And again, I'm sorry, if anyone has shared anything below the screen line and you feel comfortable sharing verbally, we would love to hear any of your ideas.
I've seen ones where having a lot of kind of assigned tech resources, which I think you mentioned before, but that's been very helpful when people have spotty internet because like they're getting cut off and they have one-on-one contacts they can kind of reach out to help troubleshoot, but also just like pass along their comments and things like that. Sometimes it's helpful to just have that resource.
That's great. Thank you so much, Philip. So just want to make sure I'm understanding. It sounds like not an advocate, but sort of it's interesting. I did see an example that's an organization was using that mentioned having an avatar in the room. So I don't know if that's kind of aligns with what you're sharing, but basically, I think it was a Harvard Business Review article that talked about having people in the room who can sort of be that connector and that bridge. Something along the lines that you mentioned where people can pass along comments. I think we've all been on Zoom meetings where someone will have to put in the chat and our colleagues will read that out for us and facilitate that sort of communication. So again, thank you for that comment, Philip. Just want to give a chance. Oh, is there someone raising their hand? Stephen, would you like to speak?
Yes, thank you. I think it's along the same lines, and I guess I had thrown out a term, but apparently this is already existing, some type of advocate or ombudsperson or like that. But perhaps it would be good so that everybody with the terminology. So this is obviously and evidently a new role to have, as to be able to basically somebody gets assigned to be that person who stops the in-person meeting and says, you need to adjust your mic. The people out there can't hear you because, a convener can often go off and somebody has to literally stop the meeting and say, your mic fell off. But if we have that term and we all can agree on it, that would be a major thing because then we'll all know what we're talking about. I don't presume to have coined the term, but I guess we need to coin a common term so we all know what that is. Perhaps remote advocate might be the best way to capture that. Thank you.
Remote advocate. Well, thank you for your comment, Stephen. And yes, that's an interesting feature or function that I think I saw that in this Harvard Business Review article of an avatar, someone sort of to stand in for people physically. But I like that's a nice ring to it, remote advocate. So thank you, Stephen, for sharing that. And we can actually move into the next scenario. So the third scenario is an online community member, an older woman, is currently speaking to the room. There's a community member in the room that is seemingly ignoring her and making conversation with neighboring people. This community member has also ignored and talked over the previous online speaker. How do you address this community member while keeping your meeting on track? Ground rules enforced by a capable facilitator. Direct message in chat. So I have a clarifying question for the scenario, Michaela. Is the woman in the room, or is she an online participant?
The woman is an online participant and the man
Okay.
is in the room.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. Start with ground rules, discuss guidelines, reiterate as needed, and then enforce. I'm kind of thinking that idea that Stephen and I think Philip shared around this remote advocate might be something that might be useful in a situation like this as well. Certainly ground rules are great for starting any event where you're going to be having collaboration and discussions. And I would say that it sounds like we might want to start revisiting our ground rules to make sure that there's language around the online participation. So maybe just being really intentional about the fact that we are coming together in different capacities. And so we'll need to make space for our digital participants, our in-person participants, and our phone participants. So we have some other ideas and thoughts coming in. If no other option, mute them. So this, I think, individual is in the room, which I think makes it a little harder to mute them. Let's see, a lot of comments around rules, which are great. The facilitator sounds like a facilitator would play a very key role in making sure that people are getting equal airtime, right? And also they're being able to share their thoughts. Okay. So are there any anything in the Mentee that people have shared that's below the screen that they would like to share verbally? Is there anything coming through in the chat, team members?
Well, Jen, there's lots of different thoughts here in the chat about different ways of kind of dealing with the challenges, and also lots of questions about deliberation and how you can do deliberation. I mean, it's you know, these different types of meetings, right, and for different purposes, and deliberative in the sense that, you know, a meeting that gives people a chance to kind of look at different options and, you know, share some experiences. I mean, that is maybe a particular type of challenge for a hybrid meeting, especially if you're trying to give everybody, whether they're on the phone or in the room, an equal opportunity to share experiences and look at different views and things like that. So I think looking at the comments, I mean, I think there's certainly there again is a place where ground rules come up, seem to be important to people. And then also, I think several of us have mentioned kind of ways of kind of weaving things together using some kind of asynchronous, you know, like the way we often use Slack or something that's asynchronous in between meetings to give people a chance to actually deliberate more on their own time. And that kind of obviously, doing it that way, you've got a way for the people who are on the Zoom or people versus people who are on there in person. It's an equal playing field for them. That they could, the Slack in between other kinds of settings can be helpful, especially for deliberation.
Thank you, Matt, for sharing what's coming up in the chat.
Sure.
Does anyone have any other comment that they haven't seen represented or they haven't heard us discuss verbally on how you might manage this scenario? And again, it's we see a lot of people commenting about ground rules, about the use of a strong facilitator, the use of tools to share thoughts and ideas asynchronously. All great stuff here. Thank you so much for sharing. Let's see, did something just come through? Okay. So now I'm going to move us into a larger group discussion. So earlier in the conversation or the presentation, we had asked about your hybrid goals and needs. And so with that in mind, we wanted to just have a group discussion. And we have some framing questions, but again, I think that there's some flexibility here for us to go beyond that if we feel the need to. But basically, we wanted to know what did people hear? Like, what did you hear? Was there anything that resonated with your goals and your needs? Or if anyone has any experience with adopting some of these hybrid approaches that can share their experience with the group. And again, we're going to use Mentee, so mentee.com. The code is 17520861. Plan, 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 practice, plan. Yep. I'd like to learn more about effective ways to connect online and in-person participants. Having several tech assistants on hand. Okay. Need to be aware of differing needs of in-person versus virtual participants and accommodate both. I'm not sure if this will speak to this comment of wanting to learn more about effective ways to connect online and in-person participants, but when I was reading up on the Invicta Club in Portugal for the Toastmasters, and actually largely for this organization, Toastmasters, this public speaking and leadership organization, what they are doing is they are trying to ensure that their meetings, their subsequent or consecutive meetings, that there is a even distribution of roles. So for this organization, they have meetings where club members take on roles for each meeting. And so they're trying to make an even distribution again of who's participating online and who's participating in person. And so you might have your Toastmaster who's like your MC in person, and then have your timer who is the individual who's timing the speeches and other parts of the meeting online. And then there's a variety of other roles, and they just want to make sure that their members are they're getting an even, well, as much as possible. There always seems to be more in-person participation, but especially as restrictions ease up. But basically, I guess one application would be, depending on what your goals are, if you're talking about your teams or if you're having some sort of community meeting, that you would be able to assign roles to different people in the different spaces. And so there'd be more, maybe a little bit more buy-in when someone has an active role on a meeting instead of being more of a passive observer or listener. So we have a comment here where in-person one facilitator is needed, online needs two, hybrid needs more. Planning hybrid takes longer than either online or in-person. Clients willing to experiment, fail, and learn are needed as we invent ways of being together. I think this comment speaks to that, what I find is a recurring message when speaking to others who are doing this work or doing research on it. We certainly have to understand that we're going to have challenges, and that again, it's iterative. It's checking in to see what worked and what didn't, and tweaks, progressive tweaks. But certainly, those of us who are participating and planning to just to understand that you do the best you can to plan and that you have a little space for grace where you might have some hiccups and bumps. We have a comment here about conflict resolution. Meeting management is most challenging part of hybrid meetings for both facilitators and participants. We need to explore these options a bit more in depth. So conflict resolution and meeting management. So for the individual who shared that comment, would you mind saying a little bit more about that? I was just curious to hear about what, the types of conflicts that might be arising with this structure and how it might have unfolded for that individual if they felt like sharing. I also want to invite anyone whose comment might be below the screen, if they feel comfortable with sharing, we'd love to hear. So I think I see a comment here about good to see possible tools. My screen is cut off, so I can't see, but I think what might address that is that Michaela and I will be sharing, with the recording, we'll be sharing a sheet of resources that we hope are helpful as you continue to plan these hybrid events. Okay, so thank you so much for your ideas and your responses to this prompt. I'm gonna move us into the next prompt. And this is the next prompt that we wanted to surface is, when we're thinking and we're planning and we're talking about hybrid meetings and events, what are the equity disparities that come to mind? What are the things that are important to consider? I think I'm seeing something in the chat about people with hearing or visual impairment. So I know that Zoom, as the platform that we're on right now, for hearing impaired, they do have the captions, which are helpful. I think that it still needs some tweaks. I'm hoping that Zoom is working on it. It doesn't always capture correctly what's being said, but I think it's a great feature that they introduced after I think most of us were meeting on Zoom. I'm not aware. Is anyone aware of any any resources or tools for visually impaired and for meeting in online spaces? Is anyone aware that they could share?
This is Laura. I don't know specific tools, but I do know the platforms need to be screen readable. Yeah, Elizabeth just put in the chat screen readers. So as long as the platforms interact with screen readers, people with visual impairments should be able to use them.
Thank you, Laura, for sharing that. So just as a follow-up question, the screen readers, is that I don't have familiarity with it, but I'm guessing that it is something that your computer comes equipped with that will read out what's on the screen to the user.
Exactly. Yeah. It
Okay.
it just reads what's there.
Okay. Thank you for that.
I just want to add. Can I just add one thing about the screen reader? It also is on your phone. So when you go into your phone, you go into settings, you can click on accessibility and you can click on read. It'll read the screen.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And I was just going to add, coming from an organization where I worked with people with intellectual disabilities and impairments, they did have specific technology and equipment to be able to participate in meetings, whether they had vision impairments or hearing impairments. They did have applications and tools that they used. Sometimes it would be a headset plugged into their computer, their workstation, that it could translate what's on the screen into, you know, something that they could hear audio. And then there, of course, were all the recordings with the transcripts and the audio recordings. So depending on which technology you're using, like if you're using Zoom versus Global Meet may have more features than Zoom. Or if you're using a regular Zoom account versus a power user account, you'll have more options with the power user account. So just be aware of what type of Zoom account you do have. Because some of the free accounts don't do nearly as many of the features as a subscription and a power user account. So just kind of know that as well going in, and always have the phone option to go along with the internet option. Because there's always someone that won't have a solid internet connection. Those have been, I've had to do a lot of meetings that were always hybrid pre-pandemic with people in multiple time zones and in geographic areas where the internet connections were very unstable. And so it was always in the planning of the meetings to have a backup and have other resources ready on hand to assist the person. I personally would always have my cell phone along with my laptop and always invite a tech person on the meeting to stay on the entire time, and invite them as a co-host so they could jump in and do things as the host versus a participant. Those are just some of the like backups and things like that. I would implore those to help me throughout the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jackie, for sharing that. And just quickly, Elizabeth, I know that you had responded to my question about the screen readers, but thanks again, Jackie, for sharing that information. It just, you know, listening to you talk is just, it goes back to what others have shared about the planning, right? That's so pivotal for this new type of structure that we're trying to do, these different type of methods that we're trying to implement, and the importance of having, you know, sort of all hands on deck, or you know, these are like team efforts, if you will, of like you know, certainly when you have a facilitator in a room, depending on the size of your room, of course, you can have a person facilitating, but you know, now that we are having all these different entry points and channels of participation, we're going to have to keep that in mind as we're planning that, you know, the manpower behind who's manning the chat, who's on hand for any technical issues, and things of that nature. I saw a comment here that was really interesting. So someone said each new piece of tech has a steep learning curve for many. That is certainly true, and I think also goes back to the understanding of the need for some flexibility and patience. Certainly we all have a lot to do. I know that everyone on this call is doing very important work, and we want to get things done in a timely fashion. But again, that definitely resonates, this idea that you have to have a little bit of space as people are learning, especially the pace at which it feels that technology comes at us nowadays. So that's another good thing to keep in mind. I see a comment here about running slides and website through colorblind, color impaired check. Would the person who made that comment like to speak a little bit more of that? I am not familiar with how one would do that.
Sure, and I don't have the resource offhand, but we've used a few, and I could try and dig them up and follow up afterwards. But if you are color vision impaired, there are online tools where you can upload your slides or a picture of your webinar, and it will tell you whether or not it's accessible for folks that are colorblind or color vision impaired.
Thank you, Danielle, for sharing that. I think what I have seen that is, it's not at all akin to that, but I know that Mentimeter has a function where you can provide information on what the images that are being shared. And unfortunately, I did not fill that information in, but it's definitely something that I will be aware of as we continue to have presentations for the team, as we always want to make sure that we are accommodating individuals so that we can have maximum participation. Is there anything that, oh wait, there's a comment here. As facilitator moderator, I tend to pay more attention to the people in the room with me. I fear that I may neglect the folks online. That's an equity caution sign for me to keep in mind. So does anyone have any experience with this or any ideas on how to be, to make sure that you're inclusive of your online participants when you are facilitating and moderating? Or maybe even just an example, if the individual who made this comment would like to just share an example of what that looks like when you're facilitating and you have these two different types of audiences.
That was my comment, and I haven't yet gotten into a situation where it's been an issue. Although we are, at least with the meetings that I moderate, we're starting to move into more hybrid formats. But with some of the larger meetings, we are still all online. And my fear is that when those larger meetings start to move to more hybrid, to have 25 people in the room and 25 people in Zoom, I just feel like I may be more apt to pay more attention to kind of the live facilitation of the people in the room and neglect the folks online. So if there's anybody here in this meeting that has more experience with how to balance that, I like the idea of multiple facilitators. And so I will actively pursue that. But if if I'm stuck as the only facilitator for both in person and online, I guess I'm looking for good tips and tricks and workarounds that folks have found to be effective.
Thanks for sharing that, Ian. Just make a little space to see if someone wants to respond to that.
I'll just say, Ian, it's incredibly difficult to facilitate solo in any event, but certainly with a hybrid in-person virtual event, I could see that being incredibly difficult and having a very low level of success. So I strongly encourage you to recruit some volunteers to help you out.
Thank you for sharing that, Danielle. I also just really quickly saw something in my research for hybrid meetings and events that an organization suggests, if it's possible, if you have screens to connect to, that you might want to broadcast your online participants. For example, if you're using a Zoom, connect it so that your participants look a little bit larger. Certainly when they're on like a laptop screen, it's probably easier to not tune in as much to that. But if possible, if to the extent possible that you can maybe have people up on an LCD screen so that when people are talking on the Zoom or on the video conferencing, you can see them a little bit bigger, and then hopefully that can be maybe a visual cue to sort of turn to the to your screens to make sure that you're interacting with those participants. I also saw some suggestions that you would want to make sure you're speaking not only like physically directing yourself to the in-person participants, but that you want to also make sure that you position yourself physically so that you're addressing your online participants as well. So I did want to also make space for anyone whose comments, again, are below the screen, because I think we have a lot of great ideas and comments that are being shared, and would love to hear from anyone who's whose comment is not being represented on the screen right now.
I think Michelle's got her hand up.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Michelle, please proceed.
Hey, I just wanted to pick up on what you had said, Jennifer, about kind of working with visual representations of people in the room, and then Mark cautioned that broadcasting participants' faces, they can dominate visually. So there's a sort of fine line between making people big enough so that people in the room respect them as people, but not so big that they get so dominating. I do think that broadcasting participants' faces in the room has another benefit that goes back to the very bad hygiene that many of us bring to participating in Zoom events, where we think we can just multitask and like turn our video off and be working on everything else and maybe be in the other room and then come back. And so one thing that I've found helpful, first, knowing that you're being broadcast to the room helps you kind of maintain as though you're in the room. But I think second, to just be clear to your remote participants, especially, I'm really interested in not like big public engagement events, but much more small kind of learning and deliberative sort of events, and to make a part of your guidelines for your remote participants that they're going to engage like they're in the room. They're going to leave their video on. They're going to actually participate. They're going to turn their phones off, you know, and there's only so much you can do to enforce that. But I think it's really important to have everyone participating with the same level of commitment if you can do it.
Thank you for sharing that, Michelle. Yes, I think it's a bit of a challenge, probably, in a juggle of wanting the full engagement, but also being equitable in terms of like Zoom fatigue and screen fatigue. But certainly, yes, if we can find a good balance so that people can, you know, be very engaged when they're on these calls, I certainly think that would be very beneficial for a lot of the goals that many of us have for these hybrid structures. So,
and Jen, can I just piggyback on that? I think that, you know, an answer to that is the same old kind of tried and true practice I think we engagement people have been doing for many years in all these different sorts of formats, online and off and hybrid, is that getting people to talk about upfront, why are they there? You know, why are we all engaging here? For what purposes? And how do we want to act together? How can we make this time as productive and participatory and equitable as we can make it? And obviously that there's some additional challenges to doing that in a hybrid atmosphere. But I think a lot of the things that Jen, you shared and the other people have shared today, it's just simply kind of different logistical ways of getting that same conversation going so that people kind of have a reason for being on the, you know, they're reminding one another why they should be participating in this kind of full way as opposed to, you know, checking in and out, which I know most people are prone to do on Zoom calls, whether they're internal work meetings or public meetings or whatever. But asking why are we here seems like a continually good thing to be doing.
yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Matt. And I think just really quickly before we move into the next, because we are 5 minutes to the end of this webinar, but you know, certainly the information that Michaela shared, I think it sounds fairly simple, I think, to have an agenda. And I think it's one of the resources and considerations that Michaela shared. But I think it's really important, at least I speak from my own experience, of course, that that we try our best to always have an agenda, be very intentional when we're coming onto these meetings together. And, you know, certainly we need time also to connect, maybe on a more social level, but be very mindful that we want to be very concise with, maximize the time you spend together, have an agenda so people know what to expect, and try to have guidelines such as deciding ahead if you're going to be on camera or off. So thank you so much for all of these thoughts and ideas that people are sharing. These are fantastic. I have one last mentee, and I know that we need to wrap up in 4 minutes. So I just was curious if there was anything that we should be thinking about that hasn't been mentioned. So just really quickly, if anyone wants to just add in Mentee, any thoughts about what is missing from this conversation, or the stuff that we can take with us out of this webinar and just be thinking about as we continue to plan our hybrid events. And again, that's if you have stepped away, it's mentee.com, and the code is 17520-861. And we can have the Mentee up actually after we close this for a little while. If anyone wants to add thoughts after the webinar, please feel free to stay in Mentee and add those. I also, so we are at 3 minutes to the end of this webinar, and I just really quickly want to say thank you to you all for joining and being here with us today and sharing all of your really great thoughts and questions. There was lots of great information shared and lots to think about as we continue planning our events and our meetings. And just a reminder, we're going to be sending a copy of the recording as soon as it is ready. We also have a nice little simple checklist that might be helpful for planning your hybrid meetings and events, and a list of resources that Michaela and I are working on that we are hoping are also helpful and beneficial. In these last 2 minutes, let's see, we have some stuff coming in the Mentee. I can see a community of practice emerging around hybrid meetings. Yeah, that would be fantastic. I think we're all always looking for resources and ways that we can do things and do them more effectively and more efficiently. Someone writes how to actually keep people engaged. I think I've been seeing some stuff about that as well. Some interesting stuff, some fun stuff, but I know it's another balance of getting to business and also having little moments of human socialization in these video conference and call-in meetings. Let's see, tiny orgs without budgets, tools and tech options when you're buying it yourself. So I don't know if anyone on the webinar is familiar with an organization called TechSoup. I'm actually doing some research on it now, and it seems to be an organization or coalition of organizations that help nonprofits and organizations with smaller budgets in terms of like discounts on equipment and software. So we're going to be including that on the resource list, and I hope that that's a beneficial lead for anyone who might need any either funding or technology supports in this work. Okay, so fantastic. So we're at 4:30. Again, thank you so much. This has been a really wonderful conversation and event. Thank you for your time. Thank you for joining. Please look out for the materials that are going to be coming your way. And I hope everyone has a really wonderful rest of their day. Thank you.